August 7, 1942, Guadalcanal. A Japanese soldier trained to believe Americans were soft and cowardly watched his entire unit get cut down in under 2 minutes by a weapon that fired 8 shots as fast as you could pull the trigger, while his bolt-action rifle managed only 1. But the M1 Garand wasn't the most shocking thing he'd discovered about America. What happened after he was captured and fed better as a prisoner than Japan fed its own soldiers would shatter everything he'd been taught. What did Japanese POWs see in American camps that made them question whether they'd been fighting for the wrong side all along? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the summer of 1943, a young man named Takeshi Yamamoto lived in a Japan that had changed. He was 22 years old and came from a small farming village where his family grew rice. But farming was not his life anymore. Now he wore the uniform of the Imperial Japanese Army. Now he carried a rifle and learned to march and fight.
Takeshi had grown up hearing stories about the emperor. His teachers said the emperor was like a god. They said Japan was a special nation chosen to rule all of Asia. Every morning in school, Takeshi and his classmates bowed toward the imperial palace in Tokyo. They sang songs about dying for the emperor. They learned that death in battle was the greatest honor a man could achieve. To surrender was worse than death. To become a prisoner was the deepest shame a soldier could bring upon his family. When the war started, Takeshi believed everything his leaders told him. They said Americans were weak and lazy. They said Americans only cared about money and comfort. They said American soldiers would run away from a real fight. The radio broadcasts promised that Japan would win the war in a few months. Victory was certain because Japanese soldiers had stronger spirit and were willing to die. Life at home had become very hard. Takeshi's mother and sisters had little to eat. The government took most of the rice for the army. They took the metal from the temple bells to make weapons. Even his family's cooking pots were collected for the war effort. Everyone was hungry. Everyone was tired. But the radio said they must sacrifice everything for victory.
In the army, Takeshi learned to use the Arisaka Type 38 rifle. It was a bolt-action rifle that held 5 bullets. After each shot, a soldier had to pull back the bolt, push it forward again, and then fire. It was slow. It took practice to do it quickly. But his officers said this was fine. They said Japanese soldiers would win with bayonet charges and night attacks. They said spirit and courage mattered more than firepower. His unit sailed across the ocean to a hot jungle island. The Americans called it Guadalcanal. Takeshi had never felt heat like this before. The air was thick and wet. Mosquitoes bit him constantly. His rice ration was half of what he got in training. Sometimes they had nothing but boiled grass to eat. Many soldiers got sick. Some died from fever and hunger before they ever saw an American. The orders came on a dark night in August. His company would attack an American position before dawn. They would move silently through the jungle. They would surprise the enemy and destroy them with bayonets and grenades. The officers said the Marines would panic and run. They said 1 Japanese soldier was worth 10 Americans.
Takeshi and 200 other soldiers moved through the darkness. The jungle was so black he could barely see the man in front of him. They wore cloth wrapped around their boots to muffle a sound. No one spoke. Takeshi's heart pounded in his chest. He thought about his mother and sisters. He thought about the emperor. He gripped his rifle tighter. They got within 50 yards of the American lines. Takeshi could see the shapes of sandbags and foxholes. His lieutenant raised his sword and screamed the order to charge. 200 voices roared as they rushed forward. This was the moment Takeshi had trained for. This was where the Japanese spirit would prove superior. Then the night exploded with fire and thunder. The sound was nothing like Takeshi expected. It was not the crack of rifles firing one shot at a time. It was a continuous roar like a thunderstorm that never stopped. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like lightning. The air filled with a sound Takeshi had never heard before. Bang, 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 bang. Fast, so impossibly fast. And then a metallic ping sound, followed immediately by more shots. Bang, 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 ping. Bang, 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 ping.
Men fell all around him. The soldier to his left dropped without a sound. The man in front of him screamed and clutched his stomach. Takeshi tried to work his rifle bolt, but his hands were shaking. He fired once into the darkness. As he pulled back the bolt to chamber another round, he heard the American rifles firing 8 times, 10 times, 12 times in the space it took him to shoot once. His company dissolved in less than 2 minutes. The Marines did not panic. They did not run. They simply kept firing with terrible efficiency. Their rifles spat bullets as fast as they could pull the trigger. 8 shots without stopping. Then that distinctive ping as the empty clip ejected. Then 8 more shots in seconds. Takeshi turned to run back to the jungle. Something hit him hard in the shoulder and spun him around. He fell to the ground. The pain came a moment later, burning and sharp. He tried to crawl, but his left arm would not work. Around him, the firing continued. He heard Japanese voices crying for help. He heard American voices calling out commands in a language he did not understand. The world became fuzzy and dark. He thought about his mother. He thought about the shame of being captured. He thought about the Emperor. Then he thought nothing at all as unconsciousness took him. The last thing Private Takeshi Yamamoto heard was that terrible ping of an M1 Garand ejecting another empty clip, followed by 8 more shots that shattered everything he had been taught to believe.
Takeshi woke up in pain. His shoulder felt like fire. But something was wrong. He was not dead. He opened his eyes slowly and saw a white ceiling. The air smelled clean, like soap. He heard voices speaking English. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy. A face appeared above him. An American face. A Marine. Takeshi's HUD filled with terror. He had been taught that Americans tortured prisoners. They would beat him and starve him and kill him slowly. He closed his eyes and waited for the pain to begin. Instead, he felt gentle hands touching his shoulder. Someone was changing his bandage. The American said something in English that Takeshi did not understand. The voice sounded calm, almost kind. Another man came over and stuck a needle in Takeshi's good arm. Within seconds, the burning pain in his shoulder faded to a dull ache. They had given him medicine. American medicine that worked better than anything he had ever known. Takeshi looked around the tent. It was a field hospital. Dozens of wounded men lay on cots. Most were Americans, but he saw other Japanese soldiers too. Everyone had clean white bandages. Nurses moved between the beds, bringing water and checking wounds. In the corner, Takeshi saw boxes and boxes of medical supplies stacked to the ceiling. Rolls of bandages, bottles of medicine, more supplies in this one tent than his entire regiment had carried to the island.
A few hours later, a different Marine brought him food. Takeshi stared at the metal tray. White bread, soft and fresh, not the hard biscuits Japanese soldiers ate. A can of meat had been opened and placed on the tray. Sliced peaches and sweet syrup. A cup of water that was clean and cool. Takeshi's hands shook as he picked up the bread. It was more food than he had seen in weeks. Back in the jungle, his daily ration had been a handful of rice and sometimes a piece of dried fish. Now his captors were feeding him like this? He ate slowly, afraid it was a trick. Afraid they would take it away. But no one stopped him. When he finished, the Marine smiled and gave him a thumbs up. Takeshi did not understand American gestures, but the meaning seemed clear enough. The Marine walked away without hitting him or yelling at him. 3 days later, Takeshi and 30 other Japanese prisoners were put on a ship. They sailed for many days across the ocean. Takeshi expected to be thrown in a dark hold with no food or water. Instead, they were given hammocks to sleep in. They were fed twice a day, rice and vegetables and canned meat. One sailor even gave Takeshi a cigarette. The Americans guarded them, but they did not beat them or curse them.
The ship arrived at a place called Hawaii. Takeshi was taken to a prisoner camp. He expected a terrible place with mud and barbed wire and cruelty. What he saw made him think he was dreaming. The camp had rows of wooden barracks painted white. Each building had screens on the windows to keep out bugs. Inside, there were real beds with mattresses and blankets, not sleeping mats on the ground, real beds. A guard showed Takeshi to a shower building. Hot water came out of pipes in the wall. Soap was provided. Clean towels waited on shelves. Takeshi stood under the hot water for a long time. He had not been truly clean in months. When he came out, he was given fresh clothes. They were prison uniforms, but they were new and whole, with no holes or patches. The next morning, a bell rang for breakfast. Takeshi followed the other prisoners to a large dining hall. What he saw inside made him stop walking. His mind could not accept what his eyes were showing him. Long tables filled the room. At one end stood a serving line with metal trays of food. Steam rose from the trays. The smell made his stomach hurt with hunger. Takeshi got in line. A cook gave him a metal tray and pointed at the food. Scrambled eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, toast with butter, a cup of coffee, a small glass of orange juice. Takeshi looked at the portions. This was more food than a Japanese officer ate. This was more food than his father had seen in years, and they were giving it to prisoners.
He sat down at a table with other Japanese soldiers. No one spoke. They all stared at their food. One man started to cry, quietly. Another man whispered that this had to be a trick. They were being fattened up before being killed. But an older prisoner who had been at the camp for 2 months shook his head. He said it was like this every day. 3 meals, all the food you could eat. He said he had gained 10 pounds. After breakfast, Takeshi stood outside and watched the camp. A truck drove through the gate carrying supplies. Then another truck. Then another. All morning long, trucks came and went. Food, clothing, medicine, building materials. More supplies arriving at one prisoner camp than Takeshi had seen in his entire military service. He thought about his unit starving in the jungle. He thought about his mother eating grass soup at home. And here the Americans fed their prisoners eggs and bacon in orange juice. In the afternoon, another truck arrived. This one was painted red and white. On the side it said Coca-Cola. Takeshi did not know what that meant. The guards opened the back and pulled out crates of glass bottles filled with dark liquid. They handed bottles to the prisoners. Takeshi took one. It was cold. He had not had anything cold to drink since leaving Japan. He opened it and tasted the sweet fizzy drink. It was like nothing he had ever experienced.
A Japanese prisoner standing next to him said quietly, "They have trucks that deliver cold drinks to prisoners in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. They have so much they can waste it on us. Do you understand now? Do you see what we were really fighting?" Takeshi did not answer, but he was beginning to understand. The M1 Garand rifle had been just the first lesson. This abundance, this casual wealth, this was the second lesson, and it was far more terrifying than any weapon. The weeks passed slowly at the prisoner camp. Takeshi began to learn English from a guard named Tom. Tom was 20 years old, just 2 years younger than Takeshi. He came from a place called Iowa, and his family grew corn. Tom showed Takeshi pictures of his parents and his younger sister. They looked happy in the photographs, standing in front of a big red barn.
Tom's father owned a tractor. Just one family had a machine that did the work of 20 men. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tom taught Takeshi words in English. Simple words at first. Water, food, thank you, good morning. Tom never acted like Takeshi was less than human. He never called him names or hit him. Sometimes Tom shared his cigarettes. Sometimes he told stories about his home and asked Takeshi about Japan. It confused Takeshi. Tom's country and his country were at war. They were supposed to be enemies, but Tom treated him like a person.
The camp had a small library. The Americans gave prisoners books to read. Takeshi found books with pictures of America. He saw photographs of cities with buildings so tall they seemed to touch the sky. He saw pictures of farms with huge machines harvesting wheat. He saw factories that stretched for miles. One book showed the inside of an automobile factory. The pictures showed hundreds of cars being built at the same time. The book said this one factory made 5,000 cars every single day. Takeshi sat on his bed and tried to imagine 5,000 of anything being made in one day. All of Japan could not make 5,000 cars in a month, maybe not in a year. He thought about the Arisaka rifles his unit had carried. Each rifle was carefully made by hand. Skilled workers spent days on each one. And here, the Americans had factories that made 5,000 cars every day. Cars that nobody even needed for the war. Just cars for regular people to drive. One afternoon in late November, the camp loudspeakers announced a special meal. It was an American holiday called Thanksgiving. Takeshi did not understand what they were thankful for. The war was still going on. But the Americans seemed excited. The cooks had been working since early morning. The smell of roasting meat filled the camp.
When dinner time came, Takeshi walked to the dining hall with the other prisoners. His mind was not ready for what he saw. The tables had been decorated with colorful paper and small pumpkins. The serving line was twice as long as usual. And the food. Takeshi stopped and stared. Whole roasted turkeys, golden brown and steaming. Mountains of mashed potatoes with rivers of brown gravy. Sweet potatoes topped with melted sugar. Green beans, corn, fresh baked rolls with real butter. Cranberry sauce that sparkled like red jewels. And at the end of the line, pies. Apple pie, pumpkin pie, cherry pie. Each prisoner could take a slice of any kind. Takeshi moved through the line in a dream. The cooks piled food onto his tray. He wanted to tell them to stop, that it was too much, but he did not have the English words. His tray was so full he could barely carry it. He sat down at a table with 6 other Japanese prisoners. None of them spoke. They just looked at their food. Finally, an older prisoner named Suzuki said what they were all thinking. "My daughter is 6 years old. She has never had enough food in her entire life. My wife feeds her watery soup made from weeds, and we are eating this." His voice broke. "We are prisoners, and we are eating like emperors. What does this mean?"
No one had an answer. They ate in silence. The turkey was tender and juicy. The potatoes were smooth and rich. The pie was sweet beyond anything Takeshi had ever tasted. With every bite, something inside him was breaking apart. Every lie he had been told was crumbling. The Americans were not weak. They were not poor. They were not cruel. They had so much that they could give a feast like this to their enemies, to prisoners, to men who would try to kill them. After dinner, Tom found Takeshi sitting outside alone. Tom sat down next to him and offered him a cigarette. They smoked together without talking for a while. Then Tom said in his slow, careful English, "Good food, yes?" Takeshi nodded. He had learned enough English now to say simple things. "Very good. Too much good." Tom smiled. "It's Thanksgiving. We give thanks for what we have, even here, even in war. He pulled out a photograph and showed it to Takeshi. It was Tom's family sitting around a table with food, the same kind of food Takeshi had just eaten. This is last year, at home. Every family eats like this on Thanksgiving. Every family. Takeshi felt like Tom had punched him in the stomach. This was not special food for soldiers or officers or prisoners. This was normal food that regular American families ate once a year. And it was more food than most Japanese people saw in a year, maybe in their whole lives.
Takeshi started keeping a journal. He wrote in Japanese, but he was learning to think in new ways. One night he wrote, "We were told they were soft. We were told they were afraid to die. But I understand now. They did not need to be willing to die. They built a country so rich and powerful that they could win without dying. While we practice dying with honor, they practice living with purpose. Which nation is truly wise?" The camp showed movies once a week. Usually they were entertainment films with actors and music, but one night they showed a newsreel about American factories. Takeshi watched with growing horror as the screen showed inside a factory that built B-29 bombers. The huge planes were being assembled on a moving line. One factory built 16 bombers every single day. The announcer said America had dozens of factories like this. Takeshi did math in his head. 16 planes per day, times 30 days, times 12 months, one factory could build almost 6,000 bombers in 1 year. And there were dozens of factories. Japan's entire aircraft industry could not build 6,000 planes in 5 years, maybe not in 10 years. He thought about the soldiers still fighting in the Pacific. He thought about the cities in Japan. There was no way to win. There had never been a way to win. The war was lost before it started. Everyone who died had died for nothing.
He remembered his training officer, who had said that spirit and courage would defeat American machines. He remembered the radio broadcasts that promised victory. He remembered bowing to the emperor's picture every morning. All lies. Or maybe not lies exactly. Maybe his leaders had truly believed it. Maybe they had not understood what they were facing. How could they? How could anyone in Japan imagine this wealth, this power, this casual abundance? Takeshi wrote in his journal again, "The M1 Garand rifle was my first teacher. On Guadalcanal, it taught me that American industry could give every soldier a weapon that fired 8 times faster than ours. But the rifle was just one small piece of the truth. The real lesson is everywhere I look, in the food we eat, in the medicine that healed my wound, in the trucks that come every day, in the movies that show factories building thousands of machines. America did not win because their soldiers were braver. They won because while we worshipped death, they built a civilization of life." He thought about the propaganda he had believed. Americans were supposed to be lazy people who only wanted comfort and pleasure. But lazy people do not build factories that make 5,000 cars a day. Lazy people do not create machines that fly across oceans and rain fire from the sky. The Americans had not avoided hard work. They had worked smarter. They had built systems and tools and factories. They had created abundance instead of accepting scarcity. Takeshi thought about the Bushido Code. Death before dishonor. Never surrender. A warrior must be willing to die for his lord. These ideas had seemed noble and pure, but what good was dying if your death accomplished nothing? What honor was there in throwing lives away against an enemy that had already won through preparation and production? The samurai of old had fought with swords against swords, but this was a different kind of war. This was a war of factories against farms, a war of science against tradition, a war that Japan had lost decades ago when it refused to see the world changing. One day, Tom asked Takeshi what he would do after the war.
Takeshi thought carefully about his answer. He said in his broken English, "I go home. I tell the truth. Japan must change, must learn, must build, not die." Tom nodded slowly. War is terrible. But maybe something good comes after. Maybe peace. That night, Takeshi wrote his final journal entry of 1944. "I came to this war believing I fought for honor and for the emperor and for Japan. I have learned that honor without wisdom is just pride. I have learned that dying for a lost cause is not noble, but wasteful. I have learned that the Americans won this war not with the M1 Garand rifle, but with the thinking that created it. They understood that 8 bullets are better than 5, that machines are better than muscles, that living soldiers win more battles than dead heroes. When I return to Japan, if I return, I will carry this knowledge with me. The war has destroyed my country, but perhaps it has given us a chance to build something better, something that values life as much as we once valued death."
The war ended in August 1945. Takeshi heard about it over the camp loudspeakers. The emperor had spoken on the radio. Japan had surrendered. Some of the prisoners cried, some sat in silence. Some felt relief that the dying had finally stopped. Takeshi felt empty. Everything he had been taught to believe was gone. The divine emperor had announced defeat in his own voice. The unthinkable had happened. It took almost a year for Takeshi to go home. There were thousands of prisoners to send back across the ocean. Ships had to be found, papers had to be filled out. Takeshi waited. He used the time to learn more English. He studied American farming methods in the camp library. He read about crop rotation and fertilizer and irrigation. He took notes in a small book that Tom gave him as a gift. Tom also gave him 3 chocolate bars wrapped in foil. "For your family," Tom said. "Welcome home gift." In the spring of 1946, Takeshi finally boarded a ship headed for Japan. He carried a small cloth bag with his few possessions, the notebook full of farming knowledge, the 3 chocolate bars, a picture of Tom and his family that Tom had given him, a small English dictionary, and memories that weighed more than any physical object.
The ship arrived at Yokohama Harbor. Takeshi stood on the deck and looked at his homeland for the first time in 3 years. His heart sank. The city was destroyed. Buildings were burned and collapsed. Whole neighborhoods were just empty lots filled with rubble. Smokestacks stood alone like grave markers where factories had been. The harbor that had once been busy with ships was quiet and still. Takeshi walked down the gangplank with the other returning soldiers. People on the dock stared at them. Some faces showed relief, some showed shame. These men had become prisoners instead of dying with honor. These men had eaten American food and accepted American mercy. In the old Japan, they would have been heroes. In this newly defeated Japan, they were reminders of failure. A Red Cross worker gave each returning prisoner a small bag of rice and directions to a train station. Takeshi walked through the streets of Yokohama. The damage was worse up close. Every third building was destroyed. People looked thin and tired. Children with hollow cheeks begged for food. Old women pulled carts through the streets, searching for anything useful in the rubble. The smell of ash and decay hung over everything.
At the train station, Takeshi waited 6 hours for a train. When it finally came, it was packed with people. Takeshi squeezed into a car that was meant for 50 people but held at least 100. Many passengers had no shoes. Their clothes were patched and repatched. A woman next to him held a baby that cried weakly from hunger. Takeshi thought about the Thanksgiving dinner. He thought about the trucks bringing Coca-Cola to prisoners.
The contrast made him feel sick. The train moved slowly. It stopped many times. Some of the tracks had been damaged by bombing and had been poorly repaired. The journey that should have taken 4 hours took 12. Takeshi looked out the window at the countryside. Fields that had once grown rice were empty and overgrown with weeds. Villages were partially destroyed. He saw almost no young men anywhere, only women and old people and children. Finally, the train reached the station nearest to his village. Takeshi walked the last 5 miles on foot. It was late afternoon. The sun was setting behind the mountains. He knew every tree and rock on this road. He had walked it 1,000 times as a child, but something felt different now. Or maybe he was different, and the road was the same. His village appeared ahead. It looked smaller than he remembered. Many of the houses needed repair. Roofs were patched with whatever materials people could find. Fences were broken. The village shrine was still standing, but the paint was peeling and the grounds were not well maintained. No young men were visible. They were all dead, or still coming home, or lost somewhere in the vast Pacific. Takeshi walked to his family's house. His hands were shaking. He did not know if they would want to see him. He had survived. He had been captured. He had eaten American food and learned American words. He knocked on the door. His mother opened it. For a moment, she just stared. Then she made a sound that was half cry and half gasp. She pulled him inside and held him tight. She was much thinner than he remembered. He could feel her bones. She kept saying his name over and over. His 2 younger sisters came running. They were now teenagers. They looked at him like he was a ghost. His father came in from the back room. He walked slowly, moving like an old man, though he was only 50. His father looked at him for a long time. "You are alive," he said finally. It was not quite a question, and not quite a statement. "Yes, father, I am alive." "You were captured."
Yes, I was wounded and captured on Guadalcanal. His father's face was hard to read. In old Japan, this would have been shameful. But this was a new Japan, a defeated Japan. Everything had changed. His father finally nodded. "You are home. That is what matters." That night they ate dinner together. The meal was thin soup with a few pieces of vegetable and a small portion of rice. It was less food than Takeshi had eaten for breakfast on any single day in the POW camp. His sisters ate slowly, making it last. His mother gave most of her portion to the girls. Takeshi could barely swallow. The contrast was crushing him. After dinner, Takeshi took out one of the chocolate bars. He unwrapped the foil carefully. His sisters' eyes went wide. They had never seen chocolate before. He broke it into pieces and gave some to everyone. His youngest sister, Yuki, was 14. She put the chocolate in her mouth and her eyes filled with tears. "It is so sweet," she whispered. "I have never tasted anything so sweet." Takeshi watched his family eat the chocolate. Each small piece was savored like a precious jewel. He thought about the POW camp where chocolate was common, where guards handed out candy bars, where the PX store sold sweets that prisoners could buy with the small wages they earned from camp work. He had lived in abundance while his family starved. The knowledge was like a knife in his heart.
Over the following days and weeks, Takeshi learned how bad things had been. His older brother had died in Okinawa. His uncle had died in the firebombing of Tokyo. His cousin was missing and presumed dead somewhere in the Philippines. The village had lost 37 young men. Out of a village of 200 people, 37 were gone forever. Food was scarce. The American occupying forces brought some supplies, but it was not enough. People ate grass and tree bark. They caught insects and frogs. The black market thrived. People sold family treasures for bags of rice. Takeshi's mother had sold her wedding kimono to buy food for the girls. But Takeshi had skills now. He had knowledge. He took out his notebook and showed his father the farming methods he had learned. Crop rotation to keep soil healthy, composting to make fertilizer, better irrigation techniques. His father listened carefully. They still had their rice field, though it had not been well maintained during the war years. Takeshi began to work. He applied what he had learned. He taught other farmers in the village. The next planting season was more successful, not abundant, but better. Word spread. Other villages asked Takeshi to come and teach them. He traveled around the region showing farmers new methods. He never mentioned where he learned these things. He did not talk about the POW camp. He did not talk about America. He just taught and helped. One evening, his father asked him about the war. They were sitting outside after dinner, watching the sunset. "What was it like?" his father asked. "The Americans. Were they cruel to you?" Takeshi thought carefully before answering. "No, father. They were not cruel. They fed us well. They gave us medicine. They treated us like human beings." His father was quiet for a long time. "I do not understand this war," he said finally. "We were told we would win. We were told the Americans were weak. But they destroyed us. And now they help us rebuild. I do not understand." Takeshi said, "I did not understand either. Not at first. But I learned something in that camp. The Americans did not win because they were more willing to die. They won because they built a nation that valued life. They created abundance. They made machines that could do the work of many men. While we practiced dying with honor, they practiced living with purpose." His father looked at him. "That sounds like you are saying they were right and we were wrong." "I am saying that honor without wisdom is just pride. I am saying that there are different kinds of strength. The strength to die is one kind, but the strength to build and create and make life better is another kind, maybe a more important kind." His father said nothing, but he did not look angry. He looked sad and tired and thoughtful.
The years passed. Japan began to rebuild under American occupation. General MacArthur brought democracy and land reform and new laws. Some people hated the changes. Some welcomed them. Takeshi watched and learned. He saw that Japan was becoming more like America in some ways, more focused on building and producing, less focused on military glory. Takeshi got married. He and his wife had a son they named Hiroshi. Takeshi taught his son to farm using the methods he had learned. He taught him English words. He told him stories, but not the stories of glory and honor that Takeshi had been told as a child. Instead, he told stories about the importance of building something good, about creating rather than destroying, about learning from others, even if they were once enemies. One day, when Hiroshi was 10 years old, he found a picture of Tom and his family. "Who is this, father?" he asked. Takeshi looked at the old photograph, Tom smiling in his Marine uniform, Tom's family standing in front of their Iowa farmhouse. "That is a man who was my enemy and became my teacher," Takeshi said. "He taught me that people on the other side of war are still people. He taught me that strength comes in many forms." "Did you fight him?"
"I fought men like him, and I lost. We all lost. Japan lost everything. But maybe we gained something too. Maybe we gained the chance to become something better." In 1960, Takeshi took his family to Tokyo. The city had been rebuilt. Tall buildings rose where rubble had been. Trains ran on time.
Factories hummed with production. People had enough to eat. Children played in parks. Japan was becoming an economic power, not through military might, but through industry and trade and hard work. Takeshi stood in the busy streets of Tokyo and remembered walking through the destroyed streets of Yokohama in 1946. He remembered the hollow-eyed children begging for food. He remembered his mother selling her wedding kimono for rice. And now, just 14 years later, Japan was prosperous. It had learned the lessons that Takeshi learned in that POW camp. Build instead of destroy. Create instead of conquer. Trade instead of take. That night, Takeshi wrote in a journal. He had kept journals on and off since the war. He wrote, "The Marines' M1 Garand rifle taught me 2 lessons. The first lesson I learned in seconds on Guadalcanal. It taught me that superior firepower wins battles. It taught me that industry and production matter more than courage and spirit. 8 bullets beat 5 bullets. Semi-automatic beats bolt action. That lesson was written in blood and fire and the bodies of my friends."
But the second lesson took much longer to understand. It took years. The M1 Garand was not just a better weapon, it was a symbol of a different way of thinking. America had so much industrial power that they could give the best weapons to every soldier. They had so much wealth that they could feed their prisoners better than we fed our troops. They had so much abundance that victory was never in doubt. We were taught that we fought for honor. They fought with reason and planning and production. In the end, reason rebuilt what honor destroyed. I survived because the Marines chose mercy over revenge. I lived because America valued human life, even enemy life. I learned because they shared knowledge freely. Japan is rebuilding now. We are learning to build instead of conquer. We are learning to create instead of destroy. We are using the strength of industry and education and hard work. These are the lessons I learned as a prisoner. These are the lessons that will make Japan strong again. Not strong in weapons, but strong in life. Strong in the things that matter. Strong in the ways that last. Takeshi looked at his son sleeping nearby. Hiroshi would grow up in a Japan that was different from the Japan Takeshi had known. A Japan that had learned the hard lessons of defeat. A Japan that understood that true power comes not from the
Willingness to die, but from the determination to build a better life for the next generation. The sound of a train whistle came through the window. It was the sound of progress, the sound of rebuilding, the sound of a nation that had learned from its mistakes. Takeshi thought about Tom in Iowa. He wondered if Tom was teaching his children to farm. He wondered if Tom ever thought about the Japanese prisoner he had treated with kindness. He hoped Tom knew that his small acts of mercy had changed his life, had changed my way of thinking, had helped plant seeds of peace that were now growing into something good. The M1 Garand had been Takeshi's worst nightmare on that terrible night in 1943. But in a strange way, it had also been his teacher. It had shown him a truth that no propaganda could hide and no ideology could deny. The truth that wisdom beats pride, that creation beats destruction, that life beats death. Japan had learned this truth at terrible cost. But I have learned. And that made all the suffering mean something. That gave all the loss some purpose. That turned nightmare into lesson and defeat into wisdom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.